Well, good morning, everyone. This is Jermaine Alberti, lead consultant with Pathways to Promise. I want to welcome you to our webinar this morning, part of our Learn and Engage series that we're doing at Pathways. The first portion of our time together today is dedicated to a presentation by Dr. David Litz on the Faith.Hope.Life campaign. And so if you are joining us via the computer, you can see the slide right there in front of you. Dr. Litz is going to lead us through a conversation for about 20 minutes, and then we'll set aside 10 minutes for a Q&A section. If you are joining us by computer using your microphone or your speakers, we may not be able to hear you, so I would encourage you to please chat with us if you have a question for Dr. Litz, or please dial into the 303 number that we gave you. So without no further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Litz to introduce himself to us and to proceed with his presentation. Welcome, Dr. Litz.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jermaine. Yes, my name is David. I have been, just a little bit of introduction here, I guess. I've been doing suicide prevention now for about 20 years. I started in the Air Force before that as an optometrist, and I got into doing policy work in a path that I believe God directed me into suicide prevention. I was able to work for the U.S. Surgeon General David Satcher in helping write the first national strategy for suicide prevention back in 2001, and was able to travel around the United States speaking to conferences and so on about that national strategy. And then I worked after that at a National Suicide Prevention Resource Center, a federally funded center where we developed a lot of tools and resources for people in various situations, including faith communities, in working to prevent suicide. I'll mention a couple of those a little bit later today. But then in 2010, 11 timeframe, we were able to launch the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, which is a public-private partnership to advance and implement the national strategy. From the very beginning, the national strategy has always included faith communities as being a key part of suicide prevention. And when we launched this National Action Alliance, one of the task forces that was launched with it was a Faith Communities Task Force. I was initially the executive secretary of that Action Alliance, but then I retired, and in my retirement, I've been volunteering as one of the co-leads of this task force, the Faith Communities Task Force. And one of two initiatives of that task force has been to develop this Faith.Hope.Life campaign. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, is kind of what this campaign is and how it relates to you all. In terms of my own faith background, I should say, too, that I'm a Christian, have been since a senior in high school. In the Air Force, I was fortunate enough, as I traveled around the world, to get close to people in a lot of different Christian branches of Christianity, everything from Midwestern flavors of fundamentalism to most of the mainline Methodist and Presbyterian denominations, Episcopalians, and have by marriage I'm pretty closely connected to some Catholics as well. So I'm pretty well versed and kind of have a great respect and appreciation for all of those various flavors of our faith. So let's just launch into here a brief discussion of the Faith.Hope.Life campaign, and then we'll have some, as Jermaine mentioned, we'll have some time for Q&A afterward. So there is an abundance of research that would back up that one of the most effective suicide prevention means we have in this country is faith, and through the connections that people make in their faith communities, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But until recently, I would say there was far more scientific evidence for these protective effects of faith than there was for any other approach, including mental health treatment. Now, fortunately, in the last few years, mental health treatments have come along and developed their own evidence base for preventing suicide, but still it's a very strong evidence base for what happens within the context of faith and faith communities, that in its power to keep people living through the most unbearable times, and really to give life meaning in the best of times as well. So, what's the Faith.Hope.Life campaign? It's the idea is that a faith community would set aside one weekend, one Sabbath, one Sunday a year at least to really focus on life, hope, the healthy connections of people in the community, reasons for living, and in supporting people who are facing mental health challenges, and including those that care for them. All of this, we believe, would make faith communities even more intentional and more effective in the power that they have in preventing suicide. And if faith leaders were really aware, thinking about the fact that whenever they're in front of a congregation, that there are members in that congregation that are at a point of despair, there would be some that really have lost hope. They feel like they have no reasons for living. They have a wish to be dead. And some of them may be even at the point of thinking about how they would end their own life. So if a faith leader is reading a scripture like the one that's on the screen now and is thinking about those people, their comments may be different than they would be if they're thinking that everyone there is just happy or kind of going through life with its normal struggles. So just to go a little bit further into kind of the role that faith communities have, one of the key elements of our national strategy right now is to change the whole conversation around suicide and suicide prevention. And part of that is to promote a better understanding of mental illnesses in that they are real illnesses and that they're treatable. Also part of that change in the conversation is to help people talk safely about suicide. It turns out that much of our conversation about suicide has not been helpful. Either we say things that are hurtful to people, or we say things that we think would help, but actually may increase someone's risk for suicide. Like, for instance, even drawing attention to how common suicide may be actually gives the wrong impression and can make someone who's really feeling like they're at the end of their rope feel like that suicide is so common that I might as well just join all of those who are killing themselves. The fact is, the vast majority of people who have even severe mental illness, the vast majority of people who are in horrible situations in their life, the vast majority of people who are very deeply depressed do not kill themselves. They find some way to get through these tough times, and they go on to live. So in this change in the conversation mode, we also have an opportunity within the Christian and Judeo-Christian faith communities to emphasize the many narratives of hope that occur in our faith literature. In sharp contrast to the Greeks, who, their literature, their ancient literature is all filled with people who in desperate situations just end their lives. Our literature is filled with cases where people in the most extreme situations find ways to get through. They find encouragement from the people around them. They find faith. They find strength in knowing God and in God's grace and mercy to them. Even folks like Job, that when his advisors said, well, why don't you just end your life, end it all, he found hope. He found a reason to keep on living. So, the literature, the science tells us that what we know in our hearts, and that is that faith communities, by their nature, foster protective factors for suicide risk. They give us, I'll just start kind of around the 5 o'clock area there of the slide, they give us a sense of belonging, which is a very strong protective factor. They give us reasons for living. They give us meaning. Our faith gives us meaning to life, something bigger than ourselves to be part of. It's full of reasons to have hope in the future in spite of our current situation. Healing from moral injury, and when I see this, I think first about those who have been in combat, and many of those are now back in faith communities as we've wound down a lot of the combat that we're involved in over the last 15 years. But these people have suffered moral injuries, and there are, not that moral injury is limited to military folks. Nonetheless, in the context of a faith community, they can find grace, they can find forgiveness, they can be restored to better moral health. And then, of course, connections to people and organizations which come through faith communities are very strong protective factors. So again, pick a week during the year. Some faith communities choose the date closest to September 10th, World Suicide Prevention Day. May also want to do something in Mental Health Month, or in May or July, National Minority Mental Health Month. But it really doesn't matter. Whatever might fit into your calendar to have a day really focused on some of the themes of the campaign. Why suicide prevention in faith communities? Just another reason. This is probably, I'm preaching to the choir here, you're all involved in mental health ministries of some sort. But the fact is, many people, large proportion of the population is much more apt to go to a faith leader when they're in a mental health crisis than they are to a mental health professional. And so the faith leader is kind of on the front lines, being able to offer help, but they're also able to build bridges into the professional treatment community, getting to know therapists in a community, doctors in a community who respect faith and know how to use faith as part of the treatment. And then also faith communities are in the front lines to respond to a suicide crisis. So it's important that faith leaders really be ready, trained, know what to say and what not to say to someone who is thinking about suicide or someone who has actually made an attempt or, God forbid, has actually ended their life, so that we're dealing now with the survivors. So Faith.Hope.Life campaign is really a bunch of resources that have been produced by a bunch of volunteers. We're no organization. We're not a 501c3 trying to raise money. We're just a bunch of volunteers that have pooled resources and built the website with the support of the Action Alliance and the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. So we have on that website communication aids, flyers, bulletin inserts, PowerPoint slides that can be shown before a service in place of bulletins. A lot of faith communities don't use bulletins anymore. They have use PowerPoint slides and save the paper. We also have worship and spiritual resources, prayers, meditations, liturgies. There are a bunch of sermon starters with ideas for to help faith leaders begin to construct a sermon around some of these themes. Hymns and song suggestions, scriptural resources, and then there's a resource page on the website that will help in doing all of these things, and including mental health promotion and Pathways to Promise is one of the resources listed on that website. Here's an example of one of the sample bulletin inserts. These are all editable, but just gives an idea that you can do this and not have to start from scratch. Here's what the website looks like. The main page kind of introduces what the campaign is, and then there are 4 live links down here: how to respond to a member who's at risk for suicide, worship and spiritual resources, communication aids, and then the other resources page. We do have a banner that looks great at conferences, and so if you're going to be involved in a conference, we'd love to ship that banner to you to put on display. Here's the things that is important for people to know on the right in responding to someone who's at risk for suicide. This is the resource page. I'd like to just point out a couple of things here. One is this the role of faith community leaders in preventing suicides, which is a PDF file you can download that really talks about the things that faith leaders can do. Skip down a couple more rows to the webinar, the role of faith leaders in suicide prevention. And this is a webinar that actually has leaders in it from Christian perspective, Muslim perspective, and Jewish perspective, talking about how suicide prevention can be accomplished in any of these different types of faith communities. And there's also a discussion there on the Faith.Hope.Life campaign. So I would encourage anyone who would like a more in-depth kind of webinar. It's a 1-hour webinar on how to really do suicide prevention well in a faith community, that this is a great place to start. Oh, down here at the bottom, I'd like to just draw your attention to a resource. One of the first things that we were able to do when we started developing this National Resource Center where I was working, and that is this a guide for religious services and memorial observances for people who have died by suicide. Really gives you ideas of things to say, what to avoid, how to care for people who have lost someone to suicide. That's, again, it's all a free resource, PDF file, download or print it off. A couple of other things on this resource list that you might be interested in. One is this role of faith communities in preventing a suicide. We were able to bring leaders from the 5 largest religious groups in the United States together and spent 2 days talking about how those groups think about suicide and suicide prevention. Our Hindu representative actually was the grandson of Gandhi, an amazing man himself, and he had spent time visiting his grandfather, so he knew his grandfather personally. Then, and his ideas are reflected in this document. And then also, there's a webinar produced by a Jewish scholar, a psychologist named Cal Kaplan. And Cal has studied and contrasted the biblical narratives with those from Greek literature, and really as a scholarly look at the approaches to dealing with distress and crisis that's presented in the Judeo-Christian literature. So I would just encourage you to think about action. You probably already do this, this group, but when I speak to other groups about this, I think the first step for faith community is to begin to pray publicly for people with mental illness and for people who are distressed about losses of reasons for living and feeling suicidal. So on the campaign website, we have examples of prayers so that people who don't even know what words to use might look at these and find words that they would be comfortable using, and that with some assurance that they can use those words safely. And then the other thing I would like you all to do if you have Facebook accounts is to find the Faith.Hope.Life campaign on Facebook and like our page, and every few days you might get an update, a posting from the Faith.Hope.Life campaign. It's just a reminder and encouragement to think about those who are in desperate situations, those who have lost hope, those who are dealing with mental illness, and think about how to promote suicide prevention in your faith community. With that, I would like to open it up to questions. I see a question, what's the cost of the banner? We have about, I think, 4 or 5 copies of these banners, and we would be happy to ship them to you. If you can afford the cost to ship them back, that would be great, but if you can't, I'll pay return shipping as well. I also have cards, and I see that the video apparently went away, but I also have little 4x6 cards, several thousand of those, and if you'd like some of those to hand out at conferences, it's just something advertising the campaign to try to get the word of the campaign out there.
Are there any other questions that you have for Dr. Litz? Or if not, you cannot connect the computer, we may not be able to hear you. So if you would text your question like Janet did, that would be awesome. But are there any other questions that anyone have that they want to share via text? Or everyone is unmuted, so if you would like to speak up now, you can.
I have a question.
Yes, please identify yourself.
My name's Jennifer. What is the actual website where all these resources are?
Great question. It is Faith.Hope.Life.org.
Is that Faith.Hope.Life.org?
Faith, as in Faith.
Thank you.
I'm also just entering the URL for the. Oops, why didn't that go? The URL for the Facebook link, and I also just entered the URL for the campaign itself. And there's the URL there.
Are there any other questions that anyone may have for Dr. Litz?
I have a comment. This is Cindy Holtrop. I really appreciate how practical your site is, and with the resources for worship and the suggestions for language that is used. That is very helpful for pastoral leaders.
Thank you, Cindy. I should also say we consider this a work in progress, so if anyone has any suggestions for additions or improvements, we're very open to that. It would be very helpful if any of you would, even want to submit a prayer that you've used or any other liturgies, readings, poems that you've used that would be, along the lines of the themes of the campaign.
We still have a few moments set aside for a Q&A with David. And so if you have any comments or any questions, we invite you to chat with us, or we invite you just to voice those out loud. I have a question. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, this is Carol Wills. I'm just checking in. I have to leave early after a while, but just wanted to let you know I'm very pleased that David has reached out to Pathways and is going through this with us. It's an excellent material, so we're very happy to recommend it to other people.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, Carol is part of NAMI FaithNet, and we're proud to also say she's a member of the board of Pathways to Promise. So thank you so much. Janet Altmeyer, question is, do you recommend having mental health professionals present the following a service that focuses on suicide awareness or support. So, David, do you recommend that you have mental professionals doing that?
I think it depends on really how deep the service might go into this. I would think that a typical service would be more about reasons for living and maybe just touch on this and touch on the fact that some people are struggling to find reasons to keep living. So it may be helpful if a sermon or a message goes fairly deeply into that, to have some resource there, someone who is prepared to talk to someone who might be in crisis. It need not be a mental health professional. It could be someone who is trained, say, in the ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. I may not have gotten all those letters right, but there are courses that lay people can take for that go from a few hours to a couple of days. That would easily prepare a layperson to handle someone in crisis. Yes, Janet, the ASSIST training is really excellent 2-day course, and I think that that's also something that faith communities might consider is sending some of their staff, some of their leaders who deal a lot with diaconal kind of ministry, to get the 2-day training. There are also some briefer trainings. Janet mentions QPR. QPR is a 1 to 2 hour training which really trains someone to identify someone who's showing warning signs and be able to take some action, even if it's just finding someone who would know how to talk with them. It's unlikely that a 1 or 2 hour training would result in someone feeling comfortable talking with someone who is in a suicidal crisis, but the 2-day training in ASSIST definitely does. They do a lot of rehearsal, a lot of practice in to develop skills in helping someone who is in crisis.
I would also like to encourage folks to consider a mental health first aid course, because that 8-hour training will provide people with at least the tools to intervene in a mental health crisis, as well as provide basic understanding of what a mental illness is and how they can assist. So we have 3 great programs that have been mentioned here: ASSIST, QPR. I mentioned mental health first aid. So, this is the beginning for many congregations of increasing mental health literacy. And my hope is that through receiving resources through Faith, Hope, and Life, through Pathways to Promise, through these other entities, that folks will be encouraged to promote that recovery as possible, but also encouraged to let folks know that they can make it. And faith communities are known for hopefully providing that hope and that faith and that life to people. So through mental health literacy and reduction of stigma, promotion of recovery, I'm hoping that individuals will be able to take what the Faith.Hope.Life campaign has put together and Pathways and use it for their benefit. We have about another minute left for a question for David. I invite you to do so. If not, we're going to talk a little bit about Sabbaths of Hope, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Holtrop to guide us through the rest of our conversation.
This is Mark Stevenson. Yes, I do have a question. I'm wondering, you mentioned at the very beginning about evidence-based material that faith communities can be helpful for people to decide against suicide. Can you point us in the direction of where to find some of the evidence that you're talking about? So, studies, that kind of thing?
Oh, I would have to think about that. I think that there are probably some on some of those resources that I mentioned, the role of faith communities, that publication that was on the resource page. I think there may be some references in there there's just so much that's been published over even the last 20 years. I occasionally, there are a couple of maybe 2 or 3 posts on the Facebook page that cite studies that you might want to look at. There's a newsletter that comes out of Duke. I don't know if it's out of the seminary or something there. One of the schools at Duke produces a monthly newsletter of research that connects faith, mental health, and suicide prevention topics.
All right, thank you.
And there is also studies on the basic benefits of faith and community, not specifically related to suicide prevention, but at Baylor with Dr. Stanley Matthews. No, I'm sorry, Matthew Stanford. I got his name wrong. But and at Duke, it's Dr. Harold Koenig. So if you Google Dr. Harold Koenig, Duke University, and I believe it's the Center for Religion and Health, and then at Stanford, or at Baylor, it's Dr. Matthew Stanford, some of his studies.
The website that publishes almost on a weekly basis through Duke University is Leadership Education at Duke University. And they also provide links to other publications such as The Mighty. And I have found those to be very helpful. This is Janet Altmeyer at Trinity English.
Great. Thanks for the help, Janet.
May I just make a very brief comment? Pathways to Promise has been incredibly helpful and supportive in our efforts to begin a mental health ministry and a companionship ministry here at Trinity English, which we are launching in May, next month.
Yay.
But also, I'm speaking from a personal level today, as I am a new survivor to a sister-in-law who completed suicide last month.
Oh, dear.
So, additionally helpful and very meaningful. Thank you.
I'd just like to say I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Yes, Janet.
Unfortunately, she was not part of a faith tradition that encouraged her to have hope. And that's been a significant part of our grieving process.
Sure.
So this is such important work that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Very definitely.
Janet, what was that third website you mentioned? The Mighty? M as in Max?
Yes, MIGHTY. And it's personal stories of people with lived experience writing about it.
I see.
In just a moment here, I'm going to have a URL for the Duke.
I've found it. It's faithandleadership.com.
Now I've lost our. Oh, here it is.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us for the webinar on today, and thank Dr. David Litz for his presentation. And I wish we could offer him a virtual round of applause. So, Dr. Litz, thank you so much for your time today. And we hope to continue these webinars where you can continue to learn from one another, and we learn from our presenters. In June, we're going to have Deborah Burrs, who's the Chief Diversity Officer with University of Missouri, St. Louis, as well as a MDiv graduate from Eden Seminary, talk about faith and cultural competency. So we want to invite you to join us in June for that webinar. We also want to encourage you to have individuals go to the Pathways to Promise website to learn more about Sabbaths of Hope. On the weekend of May 20th to the 21st, we're encouraging congregations to wear lime green or a green ribbon in solidarity to raise awareness about mental illness, and then post those pictures on their social media feed. We're going to have some ribbons available on our Pathways website for folks to order from us, and my goal is to donate those to congregations. Won't be a huge amount, but hopefully we can get some people started. And then we are encouraging for faith leaders to integrate mental health awareness in their sermons or sacred text readings or other literature component, and they can most definitely go to the Faith.Hope.Life campaign and Pathway site to get that content. But lastly, we're asking folks to set up a resource table with information on depression or other mental health topics. So that is Saturday, May 20th and Sunday, May 21st. We want to create a time of healing for individuals to bring awareness about mental illness. And, of course, most of you on the call know that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we are going to continue to promote this on our website, and would encourage you to point folks back to the Pathways website for more information about the Sabbath of Hope. On April 27th, I'll be doing a webinar providing an orientation about Sabbath of Hope, and we'll be joined by Rabbi Leslie Levin, who we were talking about how you can incorporate Sabbath of Hope in a Jewish service. So we invite you to join us for the orientation on April 27th and participate in the Sabbath of Hope on May 20th and the 21st. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Holtrop, who's going to lead us through the remaining portion of our phone call, where we invite everyone who is doing work to report out on what you're doing so you can share news, you can share announcements. So, Cindy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for this webinar.
Thank you, Jermaine. So would anyone like to start with information or things that have happened in your church or in your organization, or things that are going to be happening?
I'll share, and then I have to sign off today. This is Carol Will. Here in Indianapolis, we have the Interfaith Mental Health Coalition that's in its first year, and are still building interest among the faith leaders, finding good response from mental health care providers that are finding out about us and volunteering to contribute to our program schedule. We will continue that into 2018, but want to learn more about how the Chicago Interfaith Mental Health Coalition functions. So I may be contacting some of you in that area to learn a little more about that. The other thing, of course, that I'm involved with is the NAMI FaithNet work, and we're planning sessions at the NAMI convention, hoping that many of you would find where we are out in Washington, D.C. That's the weekend of June 28th. That's a Wednesday through Saturday, July 1st. Encourage you to come. I also want to share that there is an outstanding 2-day conference in San Antonio, sponsored by they don't call it an Interfaith Mental Health Coalition, but it's similar to that, 2-day conference on mental health ministries, and they're bringing in nationally known speakers. I suggest the name of that conference, if you want to Google it, is Pathways of Hope. Just put in Pathways of Hope Conference San Antonio, and it'll pop right up. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Take care, Carol.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, bye-bye.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Hatzel. I just want to share that July 19th there is a conference thing going on through Gift of Voice. It's a pastor day, and you can go to www.giftofvoice.com to get more information.
Thank you. Where is that going to be held?
I think it's in Edwardsville at Eden Church.
And that's in Illinois?
Yes, but I think you can log in to get involved too. But the information is at that website.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else?
I wanted to share that as part of our launching our mental health ministry in May, we are partnering with one of our local mental health organizations and displaying 5 canvases that have been painted by survivors of trauma along with the narratives as part of their recovery. And we are offering community resources for people who have experienced trauma and talking a little bit about that and actually praying intentionally for people who are recovering from traumatic episodes. And we're also partnering as part of that event with the Fort Wayne Sexual Assault and Treatment Center. So I'm kind of excited about the fact that we're actually going to be using respectful language and terminology that highlights the struggles that so many people have that often go unspoken. The other part of that is that we are publishing a magazine next month called Thinking Out Loud about stories we don't tell. And there are going to be several contributors from our community who interact with people whose stories often go untold as a way of raising awareness and starting these conversations. And our head pastor is actually contributing a piece about his own upbringing with 2 parents who struggled with mental illness. So I'm hoping that this transparency and increasing the conversations and hopefully being sensitive about doing so will help us in our efforts to start a mental health ministry.
Excuse me, what was the name of that magazine again?
It's a publication that we're writing here at Trinity English, and it's called Thinking Out Loud, and then next month's issue is called About Stories We Don't Tell.
Who is this talking?
This is Janet Altmeyer from Trinity English in Fort Wayne.
Okay, thank you, Janet. I cut myself off from the call for a minute. And were you the one who was also talking about the canvases?
Yes, and that's a part of the SHINE project. And I think that that's happening elsewhere around the country where it is an opportunity for people who are experiencing therapeutic interventions and who are working in recovery programs to creatively work through some of those challenges and then now to write about it also. So we're very excited to share those with our community.
And when is that happening again, Janet?
The display will actually be going up the latter part of this month.
Okay.
And it will be up during all of May.
Okay. I would like to have further contact with you and possibly feature something like this in our newsletter.
Very good. Would you like my email address?
Yes. I may have it, but go ahead.
It's J. Altmeyer, and that's ALTMEYER, at trinityenglish.org.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Someone else has something to share.
Sure, this is Mark Stevenson. Cindy knows about this because we're part of the same team, but for the rest of you, and some of you, Cindy or I may have mentioned this before, but this is an update. Over the last 2.5 years, Cindy and I and a number of others from our 2 different Christian denominations, the Christian Reformed Church in North America and the Reformed Church in America, produced something that we call the Guide for Clergy Leave of Absence for Mental Health Reasons. And the whole purpose of putting that guide together was because churches often know what to do if a pastor has some sort of severe physical health crisis, but if it's a mental health crisis, congregations often have a much harder time of knowing how to handle that. So we put together this guide, which gives suggestions both for the governing board as well as for the pastor on how to handle it, and then also produced a number of other resources to present this guide to groups. So there's like 50-minute, 45-minute, 90-minute slide presentations along with case studies and so on.
And so the update is that quite a number of regional gatherings of our churches, of our denominations, have been presenting this to the regional leaders. So I've been really pleased about that. And I just got contacted from the American Baptist magazine, The Christian Citizen, asking me to produce an article about this for their May issue, and of course thinking also in terms of mental health, May as Mental Health Month. So there's, I'm just excited about how at least the word is getting out. I haven't heard yet if there have been pastors and congregations that have used it, and that would be another important story or a set of stories, but I haven't heard any of those yet.
Mark,
thank you, Mark.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was curious if there's a link on the Pathways to Promise website for those resources. I believe I've seen them before, but I'm not sure where.
Well, I don't know, but can I just dictate it a moment? There's a fairly easy way to get at it where we have all the materials on our site. So you go to CRCNA, that's Christian Reformed Church North America, .org/Clergy Leave Guide. And of course, Clergy Leave Guide is all one word.
Very good.
So crcna.org/Clergy Leave Guide.
Got it. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Mark, do you want to mention something about the suicide prevention project that we're also working on?
Well, sounds like you have an idea already, Cindy. You want to go ahead?
Well, a group of us finished the project that Mark just mentioned, and then we decided, well, what should we do next? And so we're looking at suicide prevention and finding resources for congregations, resources, something of which David Litz just mentioned, and hoping to put that on our website as well. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, how do we view suicide? When I look up different faith traditions and the ways in which they view suicide, I think there's some further thinking that needs to be done about that. And that's my particular interest.
I'm also very interested in that, Cindy. Even just with the beginning conversation of the language that surrounds suicide, it's very interesting to me how even within the mental health community there are very strong opinions about how to refer to someone who has completed suicide or who has died by suicide. Like so many things with mental health, there are some strong opinions.
Do you see there to be any consensus?
Well, when I talk about this with people, and I'll say, "How do you feel about the term committed suicide?" When we start having a dialogue about it, they begin to realize that for some people that's in and of itself kind of a trigger because of that committed word being associated with sin. And so I think that starting a conversation is perhaps a place to start, but having the conversation is a good thing in and of itself.
Sure.
On the one of the this is David again. On one of the resources on the Faith.Hope.Life page is a URL for the framework for safe and effective messaging for the Action Alliance, and it really goes in depth about messaging and how to speak and communicate about suicide and suicide prevention. There's also some material in that after a suicide, recommendations for religious services. Clearly, most people have moved away from using the word commit to something like, died by suicide or took his or her own life. Getting away from the reference or the connection with crimes and sins that the verb commit generally goes with.
Right.
Mhm.
David, would you list that URL for us?
You can find all of this stuff if you go to the Faith.Hope.Life page.
Okay, I'll do that.
And then go to the resource link on that page. And then you'll find all of these different resources, the framework for safe and effective messaging, the after a suicide document. There's also that about a 30-page document on the 5 different faiths and the way they look at suicide and suicide prevention.
Anyone else has something to share? Or any further thoughts about the presentation this morning?
Hi, I'm Jennifer again. I think the presentation has been very good, and I also have a very strong interest in that actual how do we view suicide. I know I also have a mental illness, but I have a lot of friends who have committed suicide, and when I go up to speak or something, what do I say to the family and the members who have lost that person to suicide?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, do I say, I mean, I don't know. That's all.
Yeah, the After a Suicide booklet, gives you a lot of ideas of what to say and what not to say.
Thank you.
Let me find, I'll put that URL up. There you go.
I'm sorry, I don't have a connection with the internet. I'm just on my telephone.
Oh, if you just Google After a Suicide recommendations,
okay.
It should be the first thing that comes up.
Thank you.
What are some of the things, David, that you suggest people say?
Well, there are a lot of things to avoid saying, like thinking about they're in a better place now, or
right.
It's I think that probably the most common error is because people don't know what to say, they just avoid the person who's a loss, who's experienced a loss, and and just like any situation, someone who's deeply lost something that's just devastating to them, you don't have to say anything. Just be
Right.
present.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you can say to comfort someone who just lost a son or a daughter to suicide, or a mother or a father or a spouse. Nothing you can say to help. And many things you can say to hurt.
Yes.
So just be there. What can I do? In the same way that we arrange meals for someone who's lost someone, to a heart attack or cancer or auto accident, if you can respond in the same way, rally your faith community, bring in meals, the same type of support is really a key.
I'd like to add one more things not to say.
Yes.
My list is growing. I have always tried to be sensitive about not saying this, but now I'm very keenly aware when it's been said to me. When people start by saying, you must feel whatever, as if they have claimed some sort of understanding when there's
not. I know how
not.
you feel.
Yes. And then inquiring about details. That's number 2 on my list. Of fascination, when in fact that presence means so much more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important. I'm just leafing through this booklet now. Is just understand that someone who's lost someone to suicide frequently is just a whole swirl of emotions. There's guilt. There's relief. Sometimes they've been trying to keep this person alive for months or years. It's been, it's just a struggle, and there's actually sometimes they feel relief. Finally, the battle's over. But, just all sorts of, woulda, shoulda, coulda, if I had only been there, I didn't answer the call, so there's just this swirl, and then anger. Why would he do that to us, You've got all these emotions swirling around that don't follow a typical death that are present in a suicide. And so it's more complex. The grief is typically more complex and can be more severe. And so a lot of it's, like I said, just being understanding and present and acknowledging all the different emotions when they show themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You're angry, aren't you? You're angry, aren't you? That's about all I can say.
I also think if somebody is angry, just let them know it's okay to be angry.
Exactly. There are no wrong emotions to express in these situations. Just let them know that whatever emotion they may be feeling, it's just okay that you're just going to be there with them while they experience them.
I think it's very interesting, David, that you sought out people from different faith traditions to talk with them about their perceptions and their approaches to helping people to feel hope in desperate situations, because I think that for many people, I'll talk about my own family very briefly, we come from a variety of faith traditions, and that has very much gotten in the way of our family collectively supporting one another in our grief. And I think it can be a real complicating factor, so I appreciate that you've considered that in your efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll tell you, I got to facilitate that group, and it was two of the most fascinating days of my life, particularly when we had Jews sitting next to Muslims.
Yes.
And talking about this and being very honest, but always respectful. It was an amazing, like I said, amazing couple days of respect and learning that took place.
Mm. This is all very, very good conversation.
Also, I posted it, but I just wanted to, in response to Jermaine's mention of having a resource table, I encourage you all to find the wallet cards, warning signs for suicide. A lot of different people publish warning signs. A lot of them aren't very evidence-based. The best ones are published by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The link to that little wallet card is on the Faith.Hope.Life website. You can also find it by Googling, warning signs of suicide. But I encourage you just to stick with the SAMHSA ones. And you can order those, get a bunch for free if you're having a conference or want to have them at a resource table for your church. They'll send you however many hundred you need. It's the most requested document that SAMHSA publishes.
Wow.
By a long shot.
All right. Okay, we're at 12:30 my time, probably 11:30 your time. Thank you for everyone's participation in this webinar and in our follow-up conversation. I hope it's been meaningful and helpful to you. And thank you again, David, for your information and your inspiration for the work that you are doing. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you. It's been great to be with you all. Thank you for the work you're all doing.
Have a great day, everyone.
Blessed Easter to everyone.
Yes, blessed Easter.
Thank you.